You're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam. Streaming on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and at DCAUreview.com. Now, here's today's episode.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 108 of the DCAU Review. I am Liam. With me, as he always is Cal. And Cal, we are wrapping up our month in the futuristic Gotham City with our final Batman Beyond review for the time being.
Yeah, it's been a nice stay in future Neo Gotham here this month. We've had a good time. We shared a few laughs. Had a couple of picks added to our top picks section this month. So yeah, we are wrapping up this month of Batman Beyond with the next episode in order, that being Batman Beyond episode Eyewitness.
Yeah, and this is a really interesting episode. It's significant for a few reasons. One being, as I believe we mentioned last week, the first episode of Batman Beyond produced with the digital color palette. So certainly a bit of a visual shift, which we will certainly get into when we get into our main categories. But yeah, and also just kind of an interesting episode that sort of deepens and sort of focuses more on Batman and Bruce Wayne's relationship with the police, with this Commissioner Barbara Gordon. We've seen that relationship touched on briefly in the Curare episode a while back in season 1, but we really get to see that relationship on display here today, and we will get Cal's thoughts on the plot in all of our main categories. But before we do, as always, Cal, I have the IMDb synopsis for this episode.
But of course, this is the episode Eyewitness, which debuted just over 20 years ago on January 22nd, 2000 on the Kids WB network.
How about that? 20 years old now.
There we go.
And as you mentioned, this is the episode Eyewitness, which was written by Hilary J. Bader and Rich Fogel, directed by Butch Lukic, with music by Lolita Ritmanis. And that synopsis reads as such. When Commissioner Barbara Gordon sees Batman committing murder, she initiates an all-out manhunt for him while Bruce Wayne investigates what really happened. Which,
that's
not a bad one. Yeah.
That's one of the better ones, yeah.
Yeah, so we can jump right into plot from there, Cal, and this really creates an interesting world. We sort of open with Batman sort of mucking up this attempted police sting. They're trying to break up, trying to catch some arms dealers. Batman isn't aware that it's a police sting and kind of mucks things up, so him and Barbara Gordon are kind of already at odds, and then all of a sudden, after an appearance by our favorite Batman rogue, our Batman Beyond rogue anyway, Mad Stan, Barbara Gordon appears to see Terry murder him in cold blood, leading her to launch a manhunt against him. It's a really, it's really kind of a mile a minute here in this episode.
Yeah, pacing of this episode is very, very fast. I remember liking this episode a lot, and I think some of it comes from the initial surprise that you get, because the viewer obviously sees things from the same point of view that Barbara Gordon does, and sees what appears to be Terry in the bat suit killing Mad Stan. So you're like, what in the heck is going on? But of course, Terry's reaction right away and his insistence on him not murdering Mad Stan, and he says he just used his elbow or hit him in the chin with his elbow or something like that.
Terry?
Bruce, you gotta help me. I don't know why, but the cops are after me.
Did you think you could get away with killing Mad Stan?
Killing? What are you talking about?
Barbara was an eyewitness. She saw everything.
All I did was hit him with my elbow. He was knocked out, not dead.
She wouldn't lie.
And I would?
Where are you? If you want me to trust you, you've got to trust me.
Very vehemently denies any wrongdoing from the get-go, leads to a very, very quick resolution, in my opinion. And I was trying to figure out, I actually watched the episode twice, trying to figure out why it feels so rushed. And I think some of it is they draw out sort of the suspense on who's behind all of this. But once the suspense is drawn out, it's drawn out very well too, even to the point of it's like Bruce doesn't just flat out radio Terry and say, hey, Spellbinder is behind this. He tells Terry to do a UV, or no, that's what the police uses. He tells him to do a frequency search or something like that, and to a frequency scan so that he can scan the area, and it reveals that Spellbinder is standing right there. So Bruce doesn't even come out and just say, hey, Spellbinder's behind this, take a look at him. He even builds suspense in that.
Terry,
A little busy right now.
put your visor through a frequency scan.
Why?
Because I know who's behind all this. And I'm betting he's there right now, hiding behind an illusion.
Spellbinder.
But the resolution is a very quick batarang toss, and all is, Barbara finds out that realizes that this has been he's been behind this thing the whole time. And then Spellbinder sort of has a throwaway line that sort of, I don't know, says something a little bit about Barbara. It's, you were so quick to believe that he was behind this, or something like that. Almost as if he knew that Terry was Batman, like that she had this sort of grudge against Batman, but he obviously doesn't, because he doesn't know Terry's secret. So it just kind of came from out of nowhere. I don't know. I felt very conflicted when I was scoring the plot here. What did you think?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think part of it may come as this is an episode that doesn't do as well on a rewatch because you know the ending.
Right.
And so you're not sort of you're along for the ride in the sense you can enjoy the action and sort of how the mystery is crafted. But when you know the punchline is, sometimes it's hard to put that genie back in the bottle. There are certain movies or TV shows when it's all sort of built around the suspense and the mystery. Once you've seen it once, sometimes it can be, and even if you really enjoyed it the first time, it can kind of be hard to recapture that magic when you go back for a rewatch. And I think that might be part of it.
Sure.
But to your point, we have this sort of frantic thing. Like I said, there's this opening bit where, as I mentioned, Batman like mucks up a police sting operation, and then you see Barbara going to Wayne Manor to complain to Bruce that he screwed something up, and so we already know that Barbara's kind of on edge about Terry, and so they set it up interestingly. But to your point about Spellbinder and that line he throws out at the end, yeah, I guess he was a psychologist originally, right? He was like the school
I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's right.
So I guess the idea is he was just trying to play with people's emotions to see if he could get the good guys at each other's throats. But that's his motivations for framing Batman. It isn't even just like, I hate Batman and I wanted the police to kill him. It's like he has some other motivation that we aren't really clued in on as to why he was even doing this in the first place, and why he chose to really frame Batman for murder. There's some interesting elements to it. I think listening to Terry and Bruce kind of having these conversations on the phone where Terry's all frantic and Bruce is kind of frazzled and doesn't know who to believe, because of course he doesn't believe that Barbara would lie to him, but he also, has put his trust in Terry, obviously, to carry on this mantle of Batman. So when Terry sort of very, very forcefully tells him that, it wasn't him, he didn't do it, then, Bruce kind of immediately goes and tries to help Terry. And that's maybe the most fun part of the episode, is again to see a little bit more of that the Bruce and Terry relationship, get a little more nurturing, and to see Bruce kind of be the detective trying to figure it out. It's kind of, again, this sort of race against the clock where Terry's, trying to check on the body of Mad Stan, which isn't there. and then he's being chased by the police. All the while, Bruce is trying to piece things together to figure out what's going on. And yeah, I think all of the pieces are there for like a really great episode. But again, maybe just because we already knew the ending, or because the villain's motivation wasn't made particularly clear, it kind of just comes off as like, I mean, there's some cool stuff in it, but it's not like, it didn't come off to me at the end as like an all-time great episode, if that makes sense.
I agree with you, regrettably, because, you know, I wanted to love this episode a lot more than I think I ended up. And it's not to say it's not enjoyable. This, I think, is going to be, at least for me, at the end, you know, totaling up scores is going to be, this is going to come in at, you know, a relatively mediocre score compared to a lot of our favorite episodes. And that's not to say, if you haven't seen this episode, like you said, the genie in the bottle, it's a lot like, it reminded me of Over the Edge, which I have not watched Over the Edge in several years, but I remember seeing that episode for the first time, and when it debuted, and you're just like, what in the heck is going on? This is insane. And obviously we haven't had the chance to review that episode yet, so I eagerly anticipate the ability to get into that episode one day and just see whether or not it's a similar type thing, because in my mind I hold it with such high esteem because it was such a unique episode. They did such a great job of building the suspense, and then but we know, because we've seen it so many times, we know what the outcome is. We know what happens. We know who's behind it. We know how it ends. So without that suspense piece, you know, it's like watching The Sixth Sense. Like, if you know what the spoiler is for that movie, is it still a good movie? Like, can you still enjoy it the same way? You know, I don't know how much of that took away from this. I think the other thing that I thought about was, and they didn't really do this until, I believe, the Justice League episode, but a two-parter for this episode may have benefited it a little bit, because you could have gone into more depth with the Terry mucking the police sting up a little bit. You know, there could have been more depth as to what that whole story was about. She talks about it. Barbara comes to Bruce and talks to him a little bit about the ramifications, but there could have been some back and forth between Barbara and Terry there, where, you know, Terry's not exactly respectful to her. She's not exactly respectful to him. That kind of builds that tension up to the point where when he does fly in to save her husband from this terrorist, Mad Stan, that there's tension that's already built up there. It's like, you know, she thought she could have handled it, or she would rather the police be involved, or rather not him be involved. And then that could have even further elongated sort of the pursuit, the chase, the tension being built there as to, you know, how is Terry going to escape. One of the most interesting parts that I thought is when Terry, so he gets surrounded, he's going to get caught after he leaves the morgue, and the police have surrounded him. He gets away in one of the police cars and obviously flies a good distance away to this Old Town Majestic Theater that Bruce tells him he's got to take this underground tunnel behind it, and you know, you're hoping there's going to be some connection to the original series. He lands, and literally Barbara and the police are right there. It's like, that's a good, like, movie gag, like a Batman gag. But how did the entire police force get there before Terry did? That kind of was like, and it kind of ruined that. Well, what is this Majestic Theater, and why is there a tunnel behind it? And why is, like, we don't learn anything about that. We don't know. It was just there. It was just part of old Gotham, was something that we have to assume, fill in the blanks for. So I feel like a two-parter, an additional maybe 22 minutes could have stretched this out a little bit, built up that anticipation, maybe given you a little bit of a Spellbinder story, you know, some backstory. Maybe he escapes initially in that confrontation, and he and Batman have a good confrontation, like that very first Spellbinder episode. The battle scene at the end of that episode was really great. So yeah, I feel like it could have used a little more time to sort of flesh some things out. not to say, like you said, there are good spots. There's some interesting things here, but for all of that, I ended up giving plot a 6 out of 10.
And yeah, I'm right in that same ballpark. In fact, the exact same score. I also gave it a 6 out of 10. Yeah, but for most of the reasons you mentioned. Yeah, to your point about the thing where Barbara sort of, beats him to this apparent secret tunnel at this Majestic Theater. Yeah, like that's a clever gag in the sense that yes, she was Batgirl, she was Bruce's partner, and she knows about this, so she would know about this. But to me, that would be better if like we see her have that realization, and maybe she gets there just after he's going in, and maybe she has to like chase. She and the police like chase Terry down into the tunnels or something. Maybe that could have been a bit, just for that sort of change. Because I think it makes sense in the way that Barbara would know about the tunnel and would maybe even figure it out, because obviously she's, a great detective in her own right. But yeah, her and the entire police force somehow knowing to get there, and in fact getting there before Terry could, is I think maybe ruined a little bit of not ruined, but certainly I think it hurt the episode, or hurt the pacing of it a little bit. So yeah, not an awful episode or anything, but yeah, maybe a little bit of a disappointment from where you held it in high esteem when you're thinking back on it.
Sure.
Moving on to our next category, which will be visuals and animation. Cal, as mentioned, this is the first digitally colored episode. Obviously now the show Batman Beyond from here on out is much more in line with the Justice League shows and JLU. I guess does the digital color palette, does that rob a little bit of some of the mystique and some of the atmosphere that this Batman Beyond show has had up to this point for you?
I don't know if rob is the right word. I would say you can definitely tell a difference. And for me, I think the animation company on this one was Dong Yang. I could not tell you another episode that they may or may not have done. We haven't really talked about the animation companies very much, other than some of those Batman animated series episodes that we've just absolutely despised, as far as the animation is concerned. But there were some at least early fumblings and inconsistencies. I think some of the textures got washed away in a few scenes. Things are definitely brighter. Things definitely pop off of the screen a little bit more. And that works to its benefit at sometimes. I think Batman stands out a little bit more, which is good because he's in an all black suit. So standing out against the background is definitely important, where he, some of those scenes where he's up against a dark background, it's very easy for him to get lost, even with highlights on his costume. So, I think that I don't think it robs it. I think it's going to take a little bit to get used to. Yeah. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree with most of what you're saying. I think some of these episodes, especially some of the ones where they go for a bit more of an atmospheric look to the city, that original color palette where things look a little dingier and dirtier and darker. Yeah. I think there is some value in that. But again, to your point, I think it's also just kind of a culture shock, because obviously every Batman Beyond episode we've reviewed up to this point has been with that old color palette. So yeah, I definitely think it's more just getting used to it. That being said, there are some really, really great visuals actually right at the start of the episode, as Batman is about to break up this arms deal, which turns out to be the police sting. There's this shot. It's dark and rainy, and there's Batman sort of perched on the wall, and there's sort of this awesome profile shot where he's looking down, and you see the rain hitting his cowl and sort of dripping down off of his mask, and You see the lightning strike behind him. Some really cool visuals. There's a few cool POV shots. I always like when we get to see the world through Terry's eyes with some of the different lenses and stuff in that bat suit. Definitely still some fun visuals to be had in this episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that first scene is definitely the standout. As he's up against the wall, like you said, he's hanging on the wall waiting for this arms truck to arrive, and the rain drips off of his cowl and the lightning strikes. That was really great. I think that scene on the rooftop after he leaves the morgue as the police helicopters surround him.
You're surrounded, Batman. There's no escape. You might as well surrender.
Sorry, not in my vocabulary. Oh, I'm fragged.
That gave me sort of some homages and flashbacks to two different Batman the Animated Series moments, one being on Leather Wings, which, of course, is the very first episode, which you can, of course, hear in the archives at DCAUreview.com, episode 1. And also, of course, a very similar sequence can be found in Mask of the Phantasm, where Batman is being pursued by the police. And you can hear that, coincidentally, in the archives as well. But, I think that bringing that up, but giving a new spin on it and, getting to the point where he is sort of surrounded, he has to steal a police car to escape. Of course, he has the ability to turn invisible, which my first thought was, well, why don't you just turn invisible immediately? Like, why isn't Batman invisible all the time? That was my question through this. And I think it would be great if we just decided, since we sort of decided that he got this technology from the See No Evil Batman the Animated Series episode.
Yes.
And that they talked about in that episode how the film or whatever that the Invisible Man would use sort of was unhealthy if used too much. So maybe if that is the same technology, Terry can't use it too much. He can only use it a limited amount of time because it's unhealthy for him. It'll make him go crazy if not.
I like that theory.
I mean, that's the only thing I could come up with that would explain why he doesn't just walk around invisible all the time. Because why on earth would you rely on any other means of stealth?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a bit confused as to this, like the properties of this, because sometimes it appears that he's just completely translucent, and sometimes it looks more like a camouflage mode where it's like he takes, whatever, it sort of mirrors whatever surface he's standing on. So if that's the case, it kind of makes sense. You would move, you would still kind of see a human-shaped thing that was just, colored the same, and if it's moving around a lot, you would be able to spot that, I guess. But I don't know. That's me trying to figure out a reason. But yeah, to your point, he should be invisible all the time. But yeah, that does lead to some pretty cool visuals with the big UV light, and he tries to use a more traditional Batman way of escaping with a smoke bomb, and they just have a giant fan. How much use does that get when they aren't fighting Batman? I have to wonder.
Never, I guess, unless they're tear gassing somebody and they have to disperse the tear gas or something, I guess.
Okay.
Maybe. I could not tell you, though. That seems like it's just a gimmick that they created for in case we run into Batman and he throws down smoke bombs.
There you go. And then, other than that, I mean, once again, as we mentioned, we have the return of Spellbinder, who's always a very cool visual look. But to our point in when we talked about the story, he's not really in it very much. We do also have the return of Mad Stan. He has all of these very fun, wacky weapons, in addition to his sort of disc explosives that we saw in his first appearance. He has these like two giant guns
The missile launcher handguns?
Yes. He has a couple different guns and bombs and things that he's throwing around at Batman, and so I always love a good Mad Stan appearance. So I appreciated the visuals of his character. He really does come across like, I forget the character's name, but it was like the parody of the Punisher on the Tick animated series.
Oh yeah.
I forget what that guy was called, but that's honestly, and especially because he has that giant jaw, like it really sometimes feels like he's walked out of the Tick or some other sort of like superhero parody comic sometimes, but in the best way. I love me some Mad Stan. But yeah, overall, like I said, I think there's some pretty strong visuals to be had, but nothing incredible either, other than maybe those first few shots in the opening in the rain. So for all those reasons, I gave visuals a 7 out of 10.
Well, I am right there. I actually gave it a little bit stronger. I think that opening scene with the police scene were enough to give it an 8 out of 10 for me. Like we talked about, the new digital color palette is going to take some getting used to. Of course, we did review Batman Return of the Joker, Batman Beyond Return of the Joker, which used the digital palette as well, which, again, you can hear in the archives at DCAUreview.com. So there's going to be some getting used to with that. One of the other visuals that I enjoyed was the fact that at the end they reveal what actually happened to Mad Stan, after his disappearance, and he obviously didn't die. He wasn't in the morgue. It was all a ruse, created by Spellbinder. We find out that he is in one of the floating VR tubes that Spellbinder used in his last episode appearance in Hooked Up, which you can also hear in the archives. And he's there blissfully unaware of what's going on, just destroying Gotham, blowing up City Hall. No more jury duty, he screams out. Just a great line, just a great way to wrap up that character's spot here. So strong and enjoyable visuals here. A few more probably would have taken it up to a perfect score.
Well, there you go. Moving on to our third category, Cal, which is music. I'll be honest, I don't have a lot of notes for music this week. I liked the music when Terry is when he's in the morgue and an invisible person sets off the alarm, which of course we find out is Spellbinder later. And he runs out. There's some pretty good rock music that kind of accompanies that whole scene and the ensuing chase.
I'm in. Good. Now find room B15.
But it feels like music really actually kind of pulled back a lot this week. I feel like there's quite a few scenes that don't have any music at all, or very little, including kind of the end there when Terry and Barbara are having their like heart to heart about how she's like, wow, I guess I really jumped the gun, and he's telling her, well, we have that in common, or I've been there before myself, and there wasn't like a ton of music accompanying a lot of this episode, and as we mentioned, we don't get a lot of music in the Batcave, so we didn't really get much music when like Terry and Bruce are talking on the phone either. So yeah, music kind of takes a big back seat this week, I feel like.
Yeah, especially when we're coming off that episode last week with Terry's friend Dates a Robot that we talked about, just such an important part to the characters in that. And there are weeks where we've talked about where that isn't necessary for music. The music doesn't need to carry it. It doesn't need to describe the villains or the heroes. I think that you're right. The scene where he's in the morgue is we didn't really get a chance to talk about that in visuals, but visually is a very interesting scene as well. He's walking through, he's seeing all these organs that are in formaldehyde or whatever they're sitting in, these jars of human body parts, and he backs into a hanging skeleton, and you're right, the music accompanying that really sets the creepiness, the eeriness. He opens up the spot where Mad Stan is supposed to be, and he's not there, and the music sort of swells, and then he hears the skeleton rattle again, and he looks over, and the eeriness of that scene is really kicked up by the accompaniment of the music. So that scene stood out to me. Like I said, I watched this episode twice, just trying to pick out some spots for music. I was extremely underwhelmed by the music, especially in leading up to Stan being fake killed. The music just it's like you listen to it and it's just straight up organ. It reminded me a little bit of that first episode of Justice League. It's just kind of nondescript organ or like keyboard organ. And you really want something to create the tension in that scene, that part of the scene, because Terry supposedly just killed this guy. And I mean, it kicks up when Barbara starts shooting at him after she thinks he's killed him. But yeah, all that to say, yeah, music really was not a major part in this week. There's a little bit of it in the tension as Terry gets pursued by the police. And then when he finally spots Spellbinder, he sees him there. But you're right, like even at the end, Terry's on the phone with Bruce. I was kind of expecting the original acoustic guitar song that I hate to come through, the wrap up everything's okay music as Terry's putting on a tuxedo and telling Bruce that Barbara's given him this honorary police award as kind of a sorry. But it wasn't there. It was just kind of like, all right, episode's over now. So for all those reasons, I gave music a 5 out of 10.
Yep, I am right there with you with the exact same score again, 5 out of 10. Nothing wrong with it. Like I said, there's some fine music during those chase scenes, and we will make our one last plea as we wrap up our Batman Beyond month to Warner Brothers, whoever would own the rights and have the ability to distribute the soundtracks for Batman Beyond, as well as the other DCAU shows that have never had their soundtracks released. Please do that. People, I'm sure, including us, would love to pay you for it. So maybe throw it up on a streaming service or something. But so I think as always, we kind of mentioned that you really have to kind of listen, or the music really has to stand out. And just for better or worse, it kind of plays not a literal fiddle, but a second fiddle to the story and the visuals of the episode. And moving on to our final category, Cal, we have voice acting. Not a big cast this week. Some returning guest stars like Henry Rollins as Mad Stan, who we just talked about a few. John Cipher returning as Spellbinder, and like at least 2 or 3 of the cops who talk. And to the point where when I think he is both of the cops who shout at Batman to stop when the thing because there was a moment where I was like having a Mandela effect thing where I was like, wait, is all of this Spellbinder? Like, has he trapped Terry and Barbara both in this illusion, and only Barbara is actually there and none of these other cops are real? But no, that's not what happened. He just happened to, I think, pull double or triple duty as some of the other police officers in the episode. And then, of course, we have Stockard Channing as Commissioner Barbara Gordon. I got to say, I think she hasn't had a large role to play in many episodes, other than maybe, as we mentioned, the A Touch of Curare episode, which is a while back, which you can hear a review of in the archives at DCAUreview.com. I don't think she's great. I'm not saying she's bad necessarily, but I was not wowed by her performance as Barbara in this episode.
Agreed. I think that the scene between her and Bruce, where she comes down to the Batcave and confronts Bruce looking for Terry because she believes that he's murdered Mad Stan. And Bruce tells her, well, if you put out a warrant for his arrest, you're going to expose not only his secret, but my secret and your secret. And, her response is, man, it could have been so much greater, should have been so much greater, I think.
Where is he? Where's McGinnis?
Not here.
When he comes, you have to turn him over.
If you take him in, you'll expose his secret. and mine, and yours.
What other choice do I have? Do we have? Believe me, I'm acutely aware of the ramifications. I have a husband running for re-election. How long do you think that'll last when this hits the web? No one can protect us this time, Bruce. He went too far.
That was the scene really that stuck out to me as like, oh man, like I was hoping for so much more in that, so much more emotion being showed from her in that. And I think that maybe it's the character itself. She doesn't really show a lot of emotion, which is weird because compared to certainly Melissa Gilbert and Tara Strong's performance of a young Barbara Gordon, it's just the opposite. She's full of vigor and excitement and so for the character to go through this sort of change, now she's this hardened police, veteran and no nonsense, and she doesn't give an F about her secret being exposed. She knows what it's going to take, but this is what's right. Even comparing it to a Commissioner Gordon, he still had some warmth to him. So I think it's a little bit that it's sort of a shock to the system almost. That this character, it doesn't quite fit the character that we know a little bit. And then on top of it, there's a scene like that where she has the opportunity maybe to show a little bit of emotional range, and it just seemed to be kind of delivered in the same way that she delivers a lot of her lines. So yeah, it was a little bit of a disappointment in that scene in particular. I think the end sort of is better, where she sort of realizes that Spellbinder is the one behind it. That scene when she has to sort of communicate some surprise, that works a little bit better. But yeah, overall I was a little bit disappointed. It wasn't terrible, but I definitely think it could have been better.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think generally her best moments in the show to this point are those interactions with Terry. And for whatever reason, and there's some nice little dialogue at the beginning of that scene where she first goes to see Bruce after the police sting, where Bruce has made tea and they're sort of having some small talk, and there's sort of veiled references to Alfred and Bruce's inability to make the tea and cookies quite as well as he did. And again, there's some of that stuff where you're sort of reminded, oh right, these characters have known each other for X amount of years and they have all of this history, and you would think there'd be more, right, when you get to that scene in the cave where she's basically telling Bruce that she's willing to not only expose Terry's secret but hers and Bruce's as well. You would think that's like a giant moment, and where all of her kind of anger and frustration and rage at Batman, at this vigilantism that has sort of permeated Gotham City for all these years, really comes to a head. But she kind of just delivers it very similarly to her lines when she and Bruce are just sort of making small talk about Alfred's cookies. So yeah, it's not a terrible performance or anything, but we could have used a little bit more of a little bit more oomph from her. But then I think that the strongest performance this episode, perhaps unsurprisingly, are Kevin Conroy as Bruce Wayne and Terry McGinnis, and Will Friedle as Terry McGinnis / Batman. That I think is really the strongest scene is when Terry calls Bruce and sort of begging Bruce to believe him, and they sort of have a back and forth, and Bruce, as we said, is kind of working against the clock for the rest of the episode, trying to piece together what's going on. I think they're both really good. And so for their performances, which I thought were pretty strong, I gave voice acting a 7 out of 10.
I'm right in the same neighborhood. I went a little bit lower, 6 out of 10. The disappointment in Stockard Channing's performance sort of brought my score a little bit down. I think you're right. I think that the conversation between Terry and Bruce, I love the dynamic where Bruce gets on the phone with him and he's like, did you really think you could get away with murdering Mad Stan or killing Mad Stan?
Yeah.
And Terry comes back. It's like, I didn't. And he's like, well, Barbara said you did. He's like, why would she lie? He said, why will I lie? And there's this pause, and Bruce doesn't say anything. And then you can tell that he immediately is like, you're right. I trust you. I believe you.
Yeah.
And it's very subtle. It's not a line where he says it. It's just the way that he sort of pauses, and then the way that Kevin Conroy continues the dialogue. Just a really good, like, pregnant pause. Bruce considering the facts of what's going on, who this kid is at his core, at his heart, and choosing to believe him in that moment.
Yeah, and that builds on some of the stuff we've talked about, some of the episodes we talked about this month, like in the Shriek episode Babel, where Bruce sort of really goes to bat for Terry, to Barbara, and really for the rest of the city, of how much he's sort of now embodies that role, that truly embodies the role of Batman, and how Bruce himself has become inspired by this kid that he inspired, and sort of the cyclical relationship that they have. And yeah, getting to see that be a bit more on display here was cool. And yeah, I thought Kevin Conroy and Will Friedle both did really great jobs. So tallying up our final scores here, Cal, it looks like I have a final score of 25 out of 40.
Oh man, if you didn't know any better, you'd think we were related. Yes, and as we always say, we do not discuss our scores before going on the air. I also have a 25 out of 40.
Yeah, well, there you go. We don't talk about the scores, but we are related, and we very rarely disagree. I guess we can jump into rewatchability here, Cal. This is kind of a mixed bag for me. I want to hear your thoughts.
Is it a rewatchable episode? It's that's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to say, because we already talked about sort of when you know what the punchline is, when you know that the tension is sort of out of the episode, does the rest of the episode give you enough to hold on to rewatch? If you want to watch every Mad Stan episode, absolutely. You got to watch this. I think yes, I would say yes, because I still like this episode. I still enjoy it.
Agreed.
I still think that it's pivotal. At least we didn't really talk about either in plot, but they're sort of building to this fact that Terry has been in juvenile hall. There's been subtle hints at it recently, going back to the Willie Watt, the latest Willie Watt episode, where he talks about being familiar with juvenile hall, and there were a couple other nods to it during Rats, I believe. There was another mention of it. So, Dana's father mentions it in Rats, that Terry had been a bad guy or something. So, which, I mean, when it comes to treating Dana, yes, absolutely.
True.
But that's another message. Anyway,
hashtag Dana deserves better.
For sure. But yes, it sort of builds to that. We get the payoff for that later on. But that's a pivotal part of Terry's role. It fleshes out some more of the relationship between Terry and Bruce. Like I said, the trust part between Terry and Bruce, and certainly the relationship between Terry and Barbara. So yeah, I would say yes, it's worth a rewatch. It's not the best of the best when you're looking at it through this critical lens, like we do with these episodes. A bad score, we always say, does not mean, or a lower score does not mean that we don't enjoy the episode, or that we don't like them. It's just we give a ranking for certain things, and that's how they come out.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And to your point about that stuff with Terry being in juvie, again, that sort of builds this interesting idea of sort of Barbara's made up her mind about Terry almost before she even really gets to know him. And that's theoretically that leads to her saying, hey, I rushed to judgment and I was wrong, which they do pay off at the end of the episode. But at the same time, also, like, there was a guy who has what is essentially a magic thing that makes you see whatever he wants you to see, who showed her Batman murdering someone. So I almost wonder if it would have been better if, like, he just showed the illusion of a dead mad Stan and Batman standing next to him, and Barbara just immediately jumped to, oh my gosh, Terry killed Mad Stan, versus her literally seeing, and again, the audience sees what she sees, which is Batman killing him. So I almost wonder if you really wanted to kind of go down that route of, like, don't jump the gun, don't judge people by their past type of thing. Maybe a little tweak to that could have been that sort of she sees what appears or what she thinks is a already dead Mad Stan when she gets there, rather than her literally seeing a vision of Terry killing him. Maybe that's a tiny little tweak. But again, we're Monday morning quarterbacking, to say the least, 20 years later. But yeah, overall, I would agree. I think there's enough in here with the reoccurring villains and with the Bruce and Terry stuff that makes this. We give this one thumb up for rewatchability.
Totally agree with you, Liam.
All right, Cal, and that will begin to wrap us up. Thank you all so much for listening. Again, this was episode 108. Definitely want to get your feedback on it. Already had some people talking to us about this episode on Twitter and Instagram this week. I think it's an episode that a lot of people hold in high regard. So, yeah, I'd be willing to hear if you went back and rewatched it and then listened to our show. Would love to hear what your thoughts were going back to it kind of with fresh eyes. And what do you agree with? What do you not agree with? All that sort of stuff. So you can always follow us on Twitter and Instagram. The handle for both of those accounts is at DCAU Review. So definitely hit us up there. Anything else, Cal?
No, I think as we always do, we've now wrapped up this month's worth of programming, which means we have a new month starting next week, which means new month, new program. Liam, very excited to talk about where we're returning. I know you already gave the followers on Twitter a sneak preview. Another reason to follow us on Twitter, get the news first. But let's talk about where we'll be returning next week as we cover a new series for the month of June.
That's right. We will be returning for the first time in quite a few episodes, as it turns out. When we were discussing what we would be reviewing next month, we realized it had been quite a while since we had returned to this show. So we will, in fact, be returning to the world of Superman, the animated series, and we will be kicking it off with the debut of the Parasite in Feeding Time.
There we go. Old Rudy we're going to be talking about there.
That's right.
Yeah, a reoccurring villain that makes several appearances through the DCAU all the way up into Justice League Unlimited, I believe, or at least Justice League.
Yes.
A big part of Superman's Rogues Gallery. Yeah, we realized we had done a month of Superman Elseworlds, but Superman the Animated Series has kind of gotten away from us a little bit. So, yeah, definitely looking forward to returning to that world, getting some Tim Daly in our life, some Dana Delaney. We need the old standbys. So returning there for the month of June. Looking forward to that. So you will not want to miss that. But until then, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we'll talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye.